team, and I'm just thrilled to see everybody here today. Thank you so much for your time and energy. We have a lot to talk about today, as you may realize, but first I just wanted to thank Dominion Payroll, Christy McCune, Emily Jenkins. I'm going to ask Jack Shannon to come up in just a minute and say a few words, but they are just incredible partners, not just to us at InUnison, but also to the entire community. So I am forever grateful, Christy and Emily, for the partnership. And of course, your services for our payroll. So anyway, so without further ado, I'd like to welcome Jack Shannon from DPS just to say a few words. He has pictures.
You told me I could have a full 20 seconds. Hey guys, I'm Jack Shannon. I work here as an HCM consultant at Dominion Payroll and help people configure payroll and HR solutions. Community is the word, right? That's why we're all here. We are so happy to have you. Welcome. We're glad you're here. I've been the guy walking around asking if anybody needs some coffee, so raise your hand if you do. I'll try to help you out. Also, another bit of community here on Tuesday, May 20th. Williams Ballin is doing a presentation here, The Salary Fallacy. This is about, well, I'll tell you what, I will let you guys, since my 20 seconds are up, come and scan this, and I'll put it by the lunch tables. But the most important thing, thank you guys so much for being here. We'd love to see you at this. Proud to be a part of your community. Thank you.
We are also partnering with you guys May 22nd. Christy, is that the date for employment law?
Oh yeah, great.
Yeah, so you probably have seen that already on the InUnison community, so please. Is that what you're just talking about?
That's it.
Okay, there you go. All right. Thank you. Thanks, Jack. All right. Well, I already have pointed out the rowdy tables in here, so there you go. One right here, one right here. There you go. We're going to take a poll to see who's the rowdiest. Anyway, I am going to get serious right now. This research today is a true testament to your voices, because by engaging in this state of local survey that you took for us, you are truly shaping and helping to shape a clear understanding of the challenges and the opportunities. And I am, as well as my teammates, we are well aware of the challenges that you're facing today. So we just want to assure you that we at InUnison we're here to help you and support you the best way we can. But thank you for taking the time out of your day to answer our state of local survey. It really, really matters, and I'm so proud of Diana, who you'll hear soon, proud of all of our team, but we had like a 40% increase. Diana, is that true? 40% increase in survey takers. So the more data, the more voices only strengthens this research. So again, thank you for your time and your insight. Local independent businesses are not just economic drivers. And you'll hear the word shape a lot today. But you all clearly shape the character of our region. And that is really important, because the work you do in your business and the work that you do in the community have long-lasting impacts. And we have Ico County here today, we have the city of Richmond, we have other jurisdictions. They understand it. We notice. The community and the consumer notices it. So please just keep up the good work. It's very, very noticed and appreciated. Local independent businesses, in our mind, at InUnison, are the foundation of a very vibrant community. Our mission and our commitment to you is to help power your success at InUnison. And we truly mean that. And we are open to any and all feedback in your journey in running your businesses, because we are here to support you. So, and I'm so grateful for our members and just for everyone here today to take the time to be with us. So with that, I have two gifts for you today, but the problem is you can't take them with you. The first one is Diana McMahon. All right? Oh, you take me over to see? Okay, you got to take a couple of kids under 3 with you. But anyway, Diana is our Vice President of Organizational Strategy. She has collected, curated, and synthesized all of this data. She will share today some key insights. And actually, you're here today, you're the first ones to see this data, so we wait to reveal it until after this event, and then Diana will publish it. And you all will get, you'll get a copy of that. The second gift is Renee, who we consider a teammate. Renee Haltom from the Federal Reserve. She is Senior Vice President and Executive for the Federal Reserve of Richmond. Her job is to I always say she's the feet on the street in really learning about what's going on, particularly with local businesses throughout the state of Virginia. She's in charge of research and communication. And I know Diana will have some further bio for you. But without further ado, I would like to have Diana McMahon come up and start her presentation.
Thank you all so much for being here. And like Nancy said, thank you so much for those of you who have participated in this survey. It's very helpful for us. And I think it will be helpful for all of you to hear kind of what we are seeing as the state of local today. So I'll go through our report, and then Renee will come up and give you a report, and then we'll end with a group discussion so you all can kind of talk about what you heard today, what you think that means for you all. Before I kind of dive in, I wanted to put this word up here. It might be the most overused word in the English language right now, but it's probably the most honest one. And we want to just address that we understand that this is a really hard time to be a business owner. You all are trying to navigate this. You're overwhelmed. You're probably tired. And while there's been a tremendous amount of change since we fielded this report. We fielded it through February and March of this year. We still feel like it gives us a snapshot as to where businesses were, and it kind of gives us that long view lens on where we think businesses are going, even though there's been a lot of pressure on businesses since then. So we'll hear about some of the concerns, but there's a lot of positive indicators for business right now, and that's really exciting for us to be able to share with you today, and we'll wrap up with some practical takeaways too. Nancy said, at InUnison, we're really here to support our businesses, and one of those ways is through initiatives like this, research, where we can produce a report for you all that helps inform you about the environment in the Richmond region. It helps you benchmark against other local businesses' performance and their general business practices, and it allows us to influence better around the needs of our local businesses. So I won't go through the full report today, but like Nancy mentioned, it will be sent to you all after this, and then there'll be a QR code at the end so you can read the full report. To give you a little bit of insight around the methodology of the report, we had 181 respondents this year. That was a 43% increase over last year. It was fielded from February to March, so it's a very different environment today. But again, we think this offers us a long-term lens. And you can see in the graphic here kind of the breakdown of the different localities and where the respondents operate a business. And just as a data point, the U.S. Census, the latest U.S. Census, says there's about 31,000 businesses in this region. This is specific to local independent. It's a growing research project, but it gives you a snapshot of like what this representation might be and how important it is for you to continue to participate so that we really feel like it showcases what is happening in the market. And then one final thing is just that there were 13% year over year. So for you to understand, when I'm comparing 24 to 25 or over a course of 3 years, it's not necessarily the exact same respondents. It's just this is the kind of the trend for overall. As I mentioned, there's a lot of positive indicators for meaningful growth in the highlights here, but also some clear fault lines that we need to watch closely. And what's working for some is not necessarily working for all. We see that $432 million in reported revenue for 181 businesses is pretty incredible. Hiring is down, but we're seeing a better applicant quality. There's been more emphasis on tech-focused innovation, and we see a decrease in accessing capital. And then local confidence is holding stronger than what we're seeing for how people feel about the U.S. economy, even before it got really crazy. So to dive in, this is kind of what we're seeing in terms of revenue. In 2023, you see we've had a really large uptick in 2025, and that's just at the far end of this graph here, with $432 million in revenue. But we're also seeing a small and slight dip in those that are reporting being profitable. So it's a data point to be looking at, because as uncertainty both politically and economically continue, margins are continuing to tighten for our businesses. We know that local businesses are the first to feel that pinch, and so access to capital, monitoring cash flow is going to become increasingly important for our businesses. Again, this chart shows a little bit more into this. This is referencing respondents reporting out their revenue growth or decline over the last year, and that's comparing their 2024 revenue to their 2023. So growth is becoming less predictable. That moderate growth is starting to erode a little bit. We saw a lot more growth last year, but we're seeing that uptick in people reporting a decline in revenue year over year. Oh, sorry, there we go. The workforce feels slightly more stable, but we also think it could be stalling a bit. 43% of businesses plan to increase employment in 2025. And of those 43, 55% are actively hiring. When we work that out, it's about 24% of all respondents are actively hiring. So people are optimistic about the future, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're acting right now. And then 43% plan to leave employment unchanged. So we're seeing a lot more stagnation there. There's a lot less of the phenomena like the Great Resignation or quiet quitting. I think people are staying in their jobs. People are not looking to hire as much. It could be a sign of stability. It could be a sign of stagnation. And I know Renee will talk about some of those macro trends, and we'll see how that lines up and what they're seeing. And we are seeing an increase in the quality of applicants. So we're seeing more people report that mid-quality, which is this blue line in the middle. We're seeing more high-quality applicants, but we're also still hearing that it's really hard to find that mid-level talent, and that hiring is still a major challenge for many of our local businesses, and that there's probably an opportunity within workforce development in some of those non-trade related industries. Rent pressures persist across all sizes. We really look at price per square foot as a benchmarking tool for our businesses. So while our overall average cost per square foot has gone down, 60% of our respondents saw an increase in rent or property taxes. So we'll really equate that not to lower costs, but that the respondent pool has probably changed year over year. And there's some better data in the full report on that, but really this is to showcase as a benchmarking tool for those in these different square footage brackets, like what is the average that we're seeing out there. And it's a tremendously nuanced measurement, because our businesses, it really depends on the location, the industry that you're in, how much foot traffic are you trying to attract, that will impact what that square footage price could look like. We wanted to highlight, we were talking about community, we want to highlight what our businesses do in our community, the contributions that they make beyond just being a successful or profitable business. They're actively trying to give back to their community, be engaged in their community, and they estimated about $620,000 of give back to our community in 2024, with 27% giving over $10,000, and that's not just dollars that they're giving back. They're also participating with volunteer hours, they're doing in-kind services, and sponsoring events. So even as businesses feel pinched and tighter margins and things like that, they're still showing up for our community in a really meaningful way. We're seeing that our businesses are starting to serve a broader customer base. Interestingly, in 2023, 91% of our respondents were serving almost exclusively local customers, and that's really shifted to more 53%. So they're reaching a broader customer base, finding them online, and having to strategically move out of maybe that just strictly local market. This could also be impacted by the fact that we have more B2B, so those business-to-business respondents in these later years. That could be kind of part of this shift, but it's something to watch just because it has impacts on retail pockets, commercial space trends, and just something to keep an eye on. We see that trend spill over into where sales are happening for our businesses. Website sales have nearly doubled for our respondents over last year, so we're seeing people are able to engage more successfully online. In-store shopping remains the most vital way that businesses are selling, but it is starting to decline and there's more of a spread, and we saw a really steep increase in other channels, which shows that businesses are getting more creative in maybe how they're reaching their customer. We saw the same thing for B2B, so our business to business, they're increasing digital acquisition too. We saw a big jump in online lead generation, but also, that local networking is still massively important for our B2Bs as well. All right, Richmond confidence holds steady. This chart is showing you how our respondents feel about the economy, the U.S. economy, our local economy, small businesses in the U.S., local businesses in Richmond, and then their own businesses' financial security. And so this is measuring the first blue line. We had asked about how concerned are they in the first year, and then in the second years we've asked for how pessimistic or optimistic they may feel. There's still, optimism is waning still at the national level, even before we've gotten into a more chaotic time. The local economy holds steady, a bit more optimism there. I think the most jarring piece for us is really to see this at the very far end of the chart, this dip in the optimism around businesses' own financial security. We've consistently seen that be much higher in years past, and so to see that start to pull back really shows the impact of how businesses and even confident businesses are feeling at this time. Political sentiment, this we do not ask about the federal level. We ask about federal for Virginia Senate and House representatives, and then we ask about our state House and Senate representatives, the local leadership, so our city council, county managers, and the mayor. We see improved, this is measuring dissatisfaction, so we see a dip in dissatisfaction. People are feeling more satisfied. We see the largest dip on local, and I think that could be attributed to new leadership in the city because 41% of our respondents run a business in the city, so there should be some confidence there. And the highest increase in dissatisfaction was at the executive leadership level. Overall, though, we saw less neutrality. In years past, there's been more of a neutral feeling on leadership, and people are feeling more polarized in how they feel about our representatives currently. Economic concerns. I will talk about this again. This was fielded from February to March, and so we really saw a big shift from inflation in previous years down to kind of the effects of inflation. So you're looking at revenue stability, you're looking at shifts in consumer behavior really emerging. Inflation and rising costs are still a concern for sure, but we saw a rise in political and policy uncertainty and then real dips in interest rates and supply chain issues. I think if we redid this chart today, it may look a little different and that policy may be rising up to the top. And I think supply chain issues are going to become a bigger problem as people are trying to navigate tariffs and figure out, how are we going to import goods. And this is just, again, the same kind of information, but shows that year over year, previous years, inflation really held as the top concern, and now we're kind of seeing that effect play out in, more specific ways that might be impacting businesses. Capital access is tightening. Fewer businesses are seeking capital, so that middle blue line is really how many people were actually seeking capital in the last 12 months, and that is down right around 20%. And then those that are seeking it are seeing it be a little bit harder to access it. If businesses are continuing to see profit margins tighten, they have less access to capital, and cash is harder and harder to come by, it could be a real pressure point for businesses. So it's something that we want to pay extra close attention to. In terms of innovation, I mentioned this in the beginning, but there's been a shift towards efficiency and not necessarily expansion. It's an interesting data point for us to see that we dipped from 82% of our businesses saying that they've launched a new product or service in the last year down to 61%, it is a sign that maybe things are slowing in terms of growth. There's less focus on growth, new opportunity, and more focus on efficiency. And we saw about AI, 46% of respondents were investing in AI or some sort of efficiency tool. And I think for us, it's extremely important for us to stress the importance of innovation in uncertain times. We have our event Innovate Local in June, and I extend that invite to everyone. I hope that you all can make it. I think this is always an opportunity for you to look at things differently and try and do things differently. In terms of what businesses need now, our respondents kind of prioritized these specific things in terms of being able to do business more easily in our region. Things like increasing the B-poll threshold or relief for meals tax, capital access opportunities, simplifying regulations and permitting, making it easier to do business, workforce development. Again, I mentioned this previously in some of those non-trade industries. And then tax credits for businesses that are investing in workforce training. All right, so I know I've gone through a lot today, and it's a lot of information. I know that this is offering a snapshot, a perspective, but we really want this to be a tool for you all. So we hope you can take this back to your business and that you can apply it, share it with your team. A few practical takeaways that we'll offer is, if you haven't already, start thinking about cash flow forecasting. You know, that's not meant to be a fear instilling type of exercise, but something for people to feel rooted in when they are playing out different scenarios in terms of what things could look like for local business. We actually have a great session with Andy Farrell on May 22nd that's going to be on cash flow. I encourage you to be there for that. Engage in your local policy conversations productively, but your voice matters incredibly at the local level, and we are a way for you to engage in those conversations, but we encourage you to do it regardless and connect with each other. I think in times like this, the power of peer support and knowledge sharing is extremely critical, so we encourage you all to facilitate conversations with one another. And that's what InUnison is really here for. We're here for this type of connectivity, but we're also here to be a direct support for you all. And so with that, I will kind of wrap it up and see if there are any questions for me before I turn it over to Renee. All right, well, going once. You can access the full report here. I appreciate no one asking me any questions. No, I'm just kidding. You can ask any questions, and I'll come back up after Renee's finished, but I will go ahead and invite Renee to come up and join us. So Renee Haltom is Richmond Regional Executive and Vice President of Research Communications at the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. Her work involves engaging businesses, banking, and community leaders on national, regional, and local economic conditions to inform the monetary policy making process, as well as sharing information about the Federal Reserve System. Renee is based here in Richmond. She's an incredible partner to us. We're very lucky to have her today. And so with that, come on over.
There's that word uncertain again. Wow. What a surprise. Thank you all so much. InUnison really is a fantastic partner to the Richmond Fed. They have been for years. For us to track the economy, it really helps a lot to have the voice of businesses and to understand how things are playing out on the ground, especially in times of uncertainty. I can assure you there are many things you all understand more than the Fed does, because you're feeling it and experiencing it and navigating it every day. And InUnison has, for years, connected us with those perspectives. So thank you to this group. Also, congratulations on such a great event. I think this is double the size or so of last year, so that's wonderful to see. Before I start, I have to say that what I'm going to share today are only my views, not those of anyone in the Federal Reserve or the Federal Reserve System. And, you know, as Diana said, I spend my days at the Richmond Fed talking to businesses on the ground. And so I'm going to share some data, but it's also going to be informed from what I'm hearing from folks on the ground. And then I welcome any questions at the end. And as Nancy said, you know, we're partners and have been for a long time. I hope to all be partners with all of you as well. And toward the end, I'm going to show you some ways to have some continued engagement with the Richmond Fed. So I'm going to talk about the overall economy today, but I need to poll you first. There's so much happening right now. I sent these slides to Diana at 9:51 a.m. There's just so much to think about including, and I've had the data for days, but I just keep thinking of new and creative ways to analyze it, and it's just a really exciting time from that perspective. So I've got information on tariffs, and I've got information on the economic outlook. I'm going to cover both, but show of hands, who's more interested in tariffs? Oh, less than I thought. So who's more interested in the outlook? Okay, all right. Well, so I'll go through the tariffs information somewhat quickly. These slides can be sent to you. I'm available to any one of you for follow-up questions if you want to have a deeper conversation. In fact, I would love that. I'd also like to call out my colleague, Suzanne Holland, in the back of the room from the Richmond Fed. She's also a great person to know, so reach out to her as well. Okay, and so with that, I'm going to dive in. Okay, so we came into this year with a very strong baseline in the economy. And by the data, that's still where we are. So coming into this year, our growth forecasts were all for above trend growth in 2025, a stronger year than 2024. Business confidence, I'll show you a picture of what this looks like, but it had soared post-election. And so that usually portends well for economic activity and investment and hiring. The labor market was more balanced than it had been in recent years. Households appeared healthy, which bodes well for consumer spending. And then inflation was behaving. It was coming slowly down toward the Fed's 2% target, a bumpy path, but at least it was going in the right direction. So things have seemed pretty good coming into this year. Now, fast forward, uncertainty is the word of the day. The Fed's Beige Book, which is our report of anecdotal conditions, broke the record last time for how many times we mentioned the word uncertainty, broke the historical record. I will say, when you're looking at the hard data, including the data I'm going to show you today, the hard data are still good. Data lag. And so what we're hearing is a lot about sentiment right now, and fear and concern and speculation and analysis about what policy uncertainty and what tariffs will do. But that's not so much showing up in the data yet. And so I think that's a key theme, and again, why your input matters so much. Where are the data going? There's a lot of policy uncertainty. There are risks stemming from consumer sentiment, which has dipped, as well as business sentiment, which has dipped somewhat. And then private forecasts are portending lower growth. And I will say, I'm watching in real time. The private sector forecasts are very responsive to policy announcements and policy uncertainty. So I think it's hard that there's a lot of uncertainty around the forecasts themselves. And I'll show you some pictures of what that looks like. So diving in, this just shows gross domestic product, our overall measure of economic activity. And these days I have to bring my phone with me to look at the latest data because they change so often. We tend to grow at about 2% over time. That's a good, healthy growth rate. Last year, growth was quite strong. On the right-hand side, those are dots from the Fed policymakers, the forecasted Fed policymakers. The last one is on March 19th. And the median Fed policymaker at that point was expecting 1.7% growth for 2025, and then 1.8% growth for 2026. And so that's slightly a downgrade from where we were the last time there was a forecast. It's slightly below trend growth, but not dramatically so. It's not a growth falling off a cliff kind of scenario. And again, that forecast came out on March 19th. As a counter to the Fed policymaker forecast, I always like to look at private sector forecasts. Something called the blue chip forecast is my favorite measure. And as of the April 10th forecast, it's just a few days ago, they had dropped their estimate of growth for this year to 1.4% versus 2.2% last month, and their expectation for next year also to 1.4%. So a market downgrade of the forecast this year and next. And again, I think a lot of that is a reaction specifically to tariff policy uncertainty. If you look at the comments that forecasters are making, we don't know explicitly what's in their models, but they all talk about the tariffs and the policy uncertainty. So I think that's behind a lot of it. In terms of how growth is progressing for the current quarter, the Atlanta Fed does a really interesting exercise. It's called GDP Now. It's basically a black box forecast. So every time there's a new data release, they dump it into their statistical model, and it spits out where growth is trending for the present quarter. And so that green line is where growth is trending for the current quarter. And with every new data release, they mark the forecast up or down. And essentially, you see a big downgrade of the forecast for Q1. And a lot of that, before you get too alarmed, a lot of that is a weakening of net exports, a lot of which has to do with us importing a lot of stuff to get ahead of tariffs. And so that, in principle, should be somewhat temporary. So I don't want anyone to panic over it, but it is a sign that there are some headwinds to growth right now. The smaller right-hand panel just shows that of all the components of GDP, there's 4 components: consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. That net exports is the big drag. But they're also expecting lower consumer spending for the current quarter as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the outlook for the consumer. So we are seeing forecasts being downgraded at the present moment. And also, I know this is a little hard to read, the left-hand panel is recession probability as estimated by the blue chip forecasts, the consensus of forecasters. And so in the latest forecast in April, which is after a lot of tariff announcements, the recession probability in the next 12 months jumped to 47%. And where it was hovering around before that was somewhere around a third. And so there's always some risk of recession, right? But that expectation of recession jumped up. Now, this is not a foregone conclusion. A lot of this is about trying to anticipate the effects of tariffs, which are as uncertain as what the final tariff policy ends up being. But nonetheless, there's some risk out there. And then the right-hand panel shows, conversely, expectations for price growth, which also leapt. And that's also about tariffs largely. And so you're seeing these forecasts for the year move around a lot. And forecasts are only as clear as the level of certainty in the economy. And trade policy uncertainty generally is at a high right now, but trade policy uncertainty, that right-hand bar line spike, that's an actual spike in the number. It's just at unprecedented levels of uncertainty right now. So it makes sense that forecasts are very uncertain as well. I always emphasize and sort of encourage, take headlines with a grain of salt. I don't watch any one wiggle in economic data. I really look at the underlying trend. And as policy shifts, it makes sense that there's some volatility. But a lot really depends, and certainly in the eyes of forecasters, a lot depends on where policy goes from here. Okay, so that's sort of where we are in terms of forecasts. I want to talk a little bit about some basics of tariffs. And the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond has done some really, I think, some of the most fascinating work on this. So I'm going to share some of that with you really fast, and I'm happy to talk offline with anyone. So what is a tariff, right? I think you all, as small businesses, are going to be somewhat familiar with this idea. A tariff is a tax imposed on imports, and it's usually levied as a share of the value of the import. Tariffs are implemented for a variety of reasons. It might be that you want to raise revenues. It might be that you want to shift industrial policy. There might be non-economic reasons. So historically, there are lots of reasons behind tariffs. Now, the simple Econ 101 model is straightforward. It shows that tariffs will raise prices, lower output, and create what economists like to call a deadweight loss. That's just another word for less gets produced overall. Because essentially, if you're making production more expensive, that's the result. In the real world, there are different complications that come into play that change that effect. Some of the questions we're asking businesses right now, and in fact, if anyone wants to send me an email after this meeting and tell me the answers to these questions for your business, I would love to hear it. If a tariff gets implemented, right, and you're a business, how much can you mitigate that tariff, right? Can you go back to your supplier and negotiate it and try to get them to absorb some of it? Right? Or can you switch suppliers or switch country of origin? There are ways that businesses can try to mitigate the effect of tariffs. Okay, and then to the extent that a business must incur the tariff, how much of that tariff cost are you going to pass on to your customers? When I'm talking with businesses now, I hear a lot of them say, I don't have any choice but to pass on 100% of it, right? But then when I say, but is your customer going to accept that? They say, well, I don't know. Then we'll see. And it's interesting because the closer you get to the end consumer, the end individual, the less certain it seems to be that you can pass on the cost. And really, the effect of tariffs on the overall economy and on inflation depends a lot on who in that supply chain ends up bearing the cost. And that's just a giant negotiation right now. I'll show you in a second some estimates of tariffs from 2018. But in 2018, we hadn't just gone through a high inflation period where businesses got really used to raising prices, right? So do tariffs play out differently in the present environment? We just don't know. This is something we're going to have to see play out in real time. And then, if a business cannot pass the cost on to its customers, what does a business do? Does it absorb it in margins? Does it cut costs? Does it lay off workers? Are there other things it can do? So the answers to all of these questions are going to determine how tariffs actually play out in the economy. And now I'm going to complicate that analysis a ton by showing you some of our research. And by the way, if tariffs are rolled out with uncertainty, that also creates its own complications because that drags out decision making in some ways. So you all are well aware of that. I mean, I can give you some estimates from previous experiences and from the economic literature of what tariffs have done. I think, you can read this offline. One kind of rule of thumb that economists have used is that a 10% increase in tariffs raises prices by 1%. That's just a rule of thumb. There's no law that says it works out that way for all the reasons I just mentioned, but it's just that's a way of thinking about it. But what really makes the effects of tariffs hard to understand and hard to estimate is that it's very complicated to analyze and estimate how tariffs are hitting. The reason is that they are levied by country and by good, and there are lots of different country good combinations. And then for really complicated businesses, they might import thousands of different inputs from lots of different places, and so it really makes this quite complicated. And as noted on this slide, in the 2018 episode of tariffs, the overall tariff rate went to around 3%, depending how you measure it. And the current estimated tariffs are much higher than that. So I know you can't read the labels quite well. Based on estimates from the economists at the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, the average effective tariff rate, once you incorporate all of those country good combinations where the tariffs are levied, puts the average effective tariff rate at 27.5%. So that's significantly larger than anything we've experienced in recent times. And what's interesting, and I have this noted on the slide here, is that we had the Liberation Day tariffs announced on April 2nd, and then we had some amendments of that announced on April 9th, where a lot of the reciprocal tariffs were paused. By our analysis, even after that pause in reciprocal tariffs, the average tariff rate actually went up. And that's because the tariffs on China were raised so much. So some really interesting effects there. Again, I mentioned this empirical result that a 10 percentage point increase in tariffs tends to raise prices by 1%. We've done some research from businesses. We do monthly business surveys as well as a CFO survey. And it just underscores the point that businesses are responding to tariffs. They're thinking actively about what they're going to do. So about 50% of manufacturing CFOs in our survey reported that they're actively planning to diversify their supply chains due to these policies. What's really interesting is a lot of them already did that in 2018 or so. And so how many more, how much low-hanging fruit is left in terms of diversifying supply chains, or do they have to deal with the supply chains they currently have? That's an open question. Nearly 40% of businesses in our CFO survey accelerated purchases ahead of tariffs. So it's an interesting result. And then firms in outside of manufacturing, like construction, mining, and utilities, also reported being affected by tariffs and taking proactive measures. So all of this is to say that businesses are actively responding, and we're looking to see how this plays out. Again, to complicate the analysis of the effects of tariffs, they differ dramatically by industry. So we took all our economists took all those country good combinations and came up with an estimate of the average tariff affecting each industry. So I'll draw your attention, for example, to the bottom line, the longest line here. That's textile production, and it shows that the average effective tariff as of April 9th for that sector is over 70%. That's very large and grew quite a bit. But what's interesting is that we don't, as a share of our total imports, in this country, textiles isn't a big part of that. So that's not actually the sector I might focus on the most. Instead, I might focus on the factors where I put squares around. So for example, transportation equipment up at the top. Not the highest effective tariff, but a lot of our inputs in that sector are imported from abroad. It's about 13.5% of total imports in this country. And so you might say, well, that's not such a big deal because transportation equipment has, among the lower tariffs in this chart, but it's still somewhere around, 20%. So that's quite large. So all this is to say, these effects are really large historically, and I would encourage you all, you can go on our website, look at these data, or email me, and based on the sectors that you're in, there's lots of different ways to look at the effects on you. We also have a map of where tariffs are potentially going to hit by county based on employment shares by county. So you can see that there's likely to be some hotspots of where, if you're a set of businesses in a particular sector and you can't absorb tariffs and you're forced to lay off workers, where those effects might be concentrated, for example. So just to give you a flavor of how economists are starting to think about analyzing the effects of tariffs. And what I can tell you is that businesses really are starting their playbook of adapting to tariffs. They had playbooks in place after 2018, and they're kind of dusting them off and updating them for the present situation. You saw headlines like Apple airlifted 600 tons of iPhones on airplanes, right, to get ahead of tariffs. So businesses are responding and trying to mitigate the costs as much as they can. We've got tons of great analysis on our website. These can be emailed out to folks so you can read it at your leisure. But I encourage you to avail yourself of what we have on tariffs. It's going to be a really interesting, evolving topic. Okay, and so that's what I have on tariffs. And with that, I'm going to go back into the outlook. I know that what's happening with tariffs, especially for smaller businesses and especially for consumer-facing businesses, it's really top of mind for a lot of folks. And so one effect that tariffs may have, it naturally calls to mind the health of the consumer, right? I mentioned this idea of, who bears the tariff? Is it the business or is it the consumer at the end of the day? And consumers' willingness and appetite to pay those higher prices is a key question. So one of the things I'm asking businesses like you all is, how strong is consumer demand? How choosy do consumers seem? Are they pushing back against price increases? And I've been hearing for a good year and a half or more that they are really pushing back and demanding that businesses curb inflation. Is the present environment changing that at all? That's something we're trying to assess right now. So overall consumer spending, that's what's shown in this chart, is 2/3 of the total economy. So whatever consumers are doing is a big part of the outlook going forward. So I'm going to spend a minute on that. The top line is overall consumer spending, and then the bottom two lines are the things you can spend on, which are goods and services. And this chart just goes to show that we have been above trend in terms of consumer spending. We've had a very strong consumer carrying this economy for the last several years. And so the question facing us now is that poised to continue? And so I'll give you a couple things to consider. One is that retail sales comes out monthly. It did show a jump in March, which is, on the face of it, a positive sign. There's reason to believe that was a lot of consumers buying things in advance of tariffs. So maybe you're seeing strong activity now, but maybe some of that is short-lived. Maybe some of that is even pulling demand forward from the future. Or maybe the consumer is just feeling really resilient. That's a relevant question for us right now as well. And then you can look at the categories of spending as well that I won't spend too much time on. So probably consumers are pre-ordering some to get ahead of tariffs, and we think that's probably somewhat behind the March retail sales report. There are some signs of concern for the consumer right now. The top left panel shows something you're all probably well aware of from news reports, which is that consumer confidence has taken a tumble, in the word of the conference board, in the last couple of months. And this has been very responsive to tariffs and tariff-related uncertainty. All of these panels come from the conference board that surveys consumers. The top right panel shows present situation and expectations. And it shows that how consumers are doing today is still holding up reasonably well. It has dipped somewhat, but today people feel fine. It's more the future they're concerned about, right? So again, that uncertainty picture. Bottom left hand shows probability of recession as expected by consumers. That's ticked up a bit. And then families' expected financial situation. More households expect to not be doing well in the future in the last couple of months. There's a couple of other so that's sentiment, right? How consumers feel. And does that translate to actual activity? That is an open question. There are a couple of fundamental factors behind consumer health that I think are worth thinking about. I'm not calling these headwinds, but I might call them tailwinds that seem to be fading, seem to be receding for the consumer. The top left just shows a measure of wages and salaries. And it's just showing that the labor market is normalizing, it's leveling off. We have been talking about that as a good thing because the labor market has been unsustainably hot, right? No one could find or keep workers, so it's a good thing if it's leveling off. But from the perspective of consumers, does a softening labor market make them feel on the margin, more hesitant about their ability to keep their job, and therefore less likely to spend? Open question. On the right-hand side, it just shows net worth as a share of income. And net worth had been up a lot since COVID. And a lot of that had to do with stock market wealth and housing wealth. And we've seen a lot of market volatility in recent months. And then there's something called the wealth effect, which is when higher income consumers, who are the ones that hold stock market wealth, when that wealth goes down, do they feel poorer and then pull back their spending? I'm not saying we've seen that yet, but it's a question due to the market volatility that we've seen. And then in the bottom panel, it shows rising signs of consumer distress. It shows delinquency rates on different types of debt. And in particular, there have been spikes in credit card debt and auto loan debt. So I want to emphasize delinquency rates on those types of loans are still very low. But anytime you see a spike that fast, it just gives you pause. It makes you wonder about the health of the consumer. And so overall labor market softening, some shocks to higher income households, some signs of distress for lower income households, makes me wonder what happens from here. And again, we came into this year with lots of really strong fundamentals, and one can imagine a world where policy uncertainty fades and we go back into that strong growth path. I still think that's a possibility, right? A lot depends from here how the policy environment evolves, I think. So that's the consumer side of the economy. I want to also mention quickly the business side. I mentioned our CFO survey, and this sort of parallels some of the data that Diana showed. We do a measure of CFO optimism, and this is lots of fun because the top-hand line shows optimism for your own firm, and the bottom line is optimism for the economy. As a rule, businesses are more optimistic about their own firm than the economy, which is really funny, right? They think, well, whatever the economy does, I'm going to weather it well. What we saw here is a surge, a very marked surge in optimism about the overall economy post-election. In this sample, we actually cut the sample pre-election and post-election, and it was very much a day and night shift after the election. It was, and when we looked at the comments, it was expectation of a more business-friendly environment in general. Not a lot of specificity about what specific policies that they were looking forward to, but businesses as a whole felt much more optimistic. And then in the latest reading, this is a quarterly survey that ticked down a little bit. So again, I think that policy uncertainty was a big part of it. And why I say policy uncertainty is we asked businesses what they cared about the most. And between the Q4 survey and the Q1 survey, huge shift up in the number of firms that were concerned about tariffs. Not as much change in the amount of firms that are concerned about inflation, although that ticked up as well. Not as many firms concerned about monetary policy anymore. Not as many firms concerned about labor availability, but uncertainty ticked up as well. So they moved to tariffs and uncertainty being some of their biggest concerns. And I think that matches everything that we've talked about. And so one of the things that I'm watching going forward is employment. For the reasons that I mentioned, consumer confidence is heavily tied to the health of the labor market. And also, if businesses incur tariffs and are unable to pass it on, do they cut costs by cutting workers? I don't know if that's going to happen, but that's one of the possible outcomes. So the health of the job market is really important going forward. This just shows monthly job gains, and I think the upshot here is that it's been leveling off, although the March reading, we added 228,000 jobs, which is a very, very good number. It only takes 80 to 100,000 jobs to keep up with population growth. So as recently as March, we were adding jobs at a fast rate. Again, hard data still very strong. This shows measures of labor market flows. I'm showing this. This became the most popular chart during COVID. The top line there is the job openings rate. At the peak, there were 2 open jobs for every 1 unemployed person, right? And that's what you all were experiencing. You couldn't find the workers you wanted, right? That's come way down. And that's really good news. What this means is the labor market has normalized and has leveled off without a spike in unemployment. It's all been experienced through a reduction in job openings. So that's a healthy, less painful way for the labor market to normalize. And so we've been in this situation here. The bottom line is the quits rate. That has also come way down. We've been calling this a low hiring, low firing equilibrium. It just feels like businesses are not hiring that much, they're not firing that much, they're feeling a little cautious. And so does that continue, or do we tip in one direction or the other? I also want to emphasize that the labor market still is quite tight. The top left panel is the unemployment rate. It's still at 4.2%, I think is the most recent reading. That's near most measures of the natural rate of unemployment. The bottom is claims for unemployment insurance, and that is still at historically very, very, very low levels. You can start to see some upticks, especially if you look at the data for federal workers, which is another topic of conversation. By lots of measures, the labor market is still very, very tight. And so we're still today at a healthy position in terms of the labor market. I'm going to wrap it up quickly. I'll probably skip over some stuff about monetary policy, but happy to talk about that if there's questions. Inflation is coming down. One of the risks that tariffs pose is to inflation. So for the Fed, this becomes something we're watching very closely. I'll skip over that. This is just to show where the Fed's policy rate has been. We have lowered rates, interest rates, in the last couple of policy meetings, several policy meetings. We've paused more recently, and really what the Fed has done is say, we lowered rates not because we think the economic outlook is falling off a cliff. It actually, what's happening is inflation has become healthier, the labor market has become healthier. We didn't need rates to be as high or as restrictive as they were. We could ease off a little bit. And the Fed believes that this left us better positioned to deal with whatever policy challenges come. And so on that note, I'm going to wrap up. So what should you expect? As if I'm going to tell you the answer to all of this uncertainty right now. What I will say, the upshot for today, is that the data are still strong, but they're lagged. So we'll see what the next round of data show. Previous Fed rate adjustments leave us well positioned to deal with what comes. Higher inflation plus slower growth is a much harder situation for the Fed to be in, because if you raise rates to deal with inflation, you might hurt the labor market. But if you keep rates low to support the labor market, you might not deal with inflation. So that's a tougher situation. Tons of uncertainty with this outlook, and then we really need the input from businesses more than ever. So please do reach out to me. Fair warning, get out your phones. I'm going to show you a QR code next. We want to know, how is consumer momentum? Are consumers still healthy? Are they still turning out? Are you feeling a pullback? What's happening to price growth? Are you able to pass along prices? And then to the extent that you're experiencing tariffs, how is that affecting you? How are you navigating it? We do monthly business surveys. I would love to have any of you in our surveys if you aren't already. We read every comment every month, and there's a friendly internal competition to see who can get the most survey participants. And so this is how you can help me win. No, in all seriousness, though, we really do take it seriously. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. I don't know if there's time for questions. I know we want to have some discussion too. But with that, thank you all so much.
When you talk about labor market flows and wage data, can you tell me, are you measuring that on the federal minimum wage? Or is there any, I don't know if I'm asking the question correctly, but, if it's $77.25 an hour versus $18 an hour, how are you measuring that?
So it's the labor market flows data comes from a survey of, it shows the job openings rate, the quits rate, and the fires rate. We're asking, there's nothing to do with wages in there. They do break it down by sector, so you can look by sector, and that would help too. If you want to look at things like underemployment or people working multiple jobs to get by, it's just a different set of data to look at. Yeah, that's a quick answer. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Well, Nancy, Diana, thank you all so much. I really appreciate being here with you.
Thank you. All right, well, you were not very inquisitive with us, but we're going to make you all talk to each other. So we have a couple of prompts for you. We'd love for you to just spend the next 10 minutes, and then we're going to ask a couple of you to share out around these questions, or just what is top of mind for you coming off of what both Renee and I discussed. But what insights from today's presentation most resonated with your business and why, and then what's one idea or change that you're taking back to your team based on what you heard today. So we'll give you a little bit of time, and then we will pick on people if you don't volunteer to share out. So. right, I'm going to have everyone come back to... I'm sorry to break up all the conversations, but I'm going to ask, is there anyone who wants to volunteer to share what maybe their table talked about? Tamisha.
Hi everyone, Tamisha Williams Consulting. So some things that we only got to the first question. Some things that resonated with us is just this idea of uncertainty driving fear. Also the need for connection to not just happen at the personal to personal level, but what does it look like for businesses to be connecting with and supporting each other through uncertain times. Just feeling the need to make real-time decision-making in a time of uncertainty and the challenges that brings. We also talked about the folks really seeking solid ground where there's not a lot, so whether that be looking for positive data or looking for positive relationships or just things that are happening well. And then the last thing is this idea of sentiment versus hard data. How do we help our clients, for those of us that work with clients, navigate sentiment versus reality so that they're not making a lot of big moves when their data actually says that they don't need to, and then how to also keep this conversation going, because we'd love to know what would this look like in 3 months and in 6 months so that we can continue to have that sentiment versus hard data.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I think that I will say I feel a lot of what Renee talked about and a lot of what I shared on the health of business is very good. And so you're reiterating that there are a lot of positives even in a very uncertain time, but there are things to be looking out for, and we would love to help facilitate some more of that connectivity and some more of the conversation in a couple more months and seeing, because things are changing by the second, it feels like. So absolutely. Anyone else want to share?
I'll share. Everything is a variable cost right now. There's no, whether you're reporting tea, you have no idea what it's going to cost, or for me, dog kennels. I'm in the middle of starting construction. I have zero trust that we'll be able to get off the ground for months until it settles down. I literally cannot get costs per product. We'll see when you ship it.
I know many are feeling that same pain of just not having a clear answer or directive on what it's going to look like. So even some of that like projection is impossible to do, or being able to plan appropriately. And we really feel for you in having to make those kind of hard calls for sure.
I have just one comment to make. In my my industry's a little bit different, and everything in my one business, everything is imported from China. It's designed here in the U.S., but it's actually manufactured in China. I'm in the formal wear industry, and I will tell you, my designers are in panic mode because at this moment, the warehouses are full, which is great because they've planned ahead. We're at the end of a major season in the formal industry, which is prom, and that's nationwide. But the warehouses are coming to the end of being fully stocked. And my concern is once these warehouses in 30, 60, 90 days, these warehouses are empty, that's when the real trouble is going to begin in my industry. Because my designers are now saying, okay, we're going to consume a lot of this, we're going to take on a lot of this tariff right now, we're going to give you a 20% increase, that's going to be it. And then, after April 19th, it's going to be at 45, and then once the warehouses are empty here, that's when my industry is going to suffer. So that has to be in a lot of different industries, not just mine, that a lot of people have warehouses full of things that you would normally import, but once those warehouses are empty, then what?
Are there any other thoughts around that? I want to hear, do you all feel that same concern? I know this is an incredibly, like, the spectrum of what people are dealing with, and it can be very specific to the industry that you may be in. But are there any other thoughts around what Lisa and I believe Michael was sharing? Yeah. How do you all feel like consumer spending is? What does that feel like for you all right now?
whole lot less optimistic than maybe the data that was shared today showed. But I mean, it's always changing, like Renee said. But yeah, definitely a little less optimistic start to the year, at least in our industry. And in terms of the tariffs, just concerned about potentially driving prices up. I mean, a lot of our raw materials, obviously all the peanuts, Whitley's Peanut Factory, sorry, are from right here in Virginia, but a lot of the raw materials, steel and other things are some imported, some domestic. But, just a lot of concerns there. I want to hang on to this.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? So
Absolutely.
how about your employees? You know, I think sometimes you have to focus on the consumer, right? That's the bottom line. But employee, you know, concerns, that, I mean, are they sharing any of that with you, or do you feel any kind of sentiments around that? Because remember, they're also consumers, right?
So my name is Mike King. I have a business radio program, and we talk to everyone every single day. Uncertainty is the key that most business owners are talking about. But the part that Nancy and Julie had spoke about, we talk to business leaders and owners, and they're saying, if things get tight, I have to take it has to come out of mine before I start disrupting my employees, their future, their families. These are employees who work with us, but in reality, these are families. So uncertainty of business across the board, everyone is feeling uneasy now.
Well, it's similar, but I don't think my employees, we had a conversation about a week ago, they're not uncertain, they're scared. They're seeing it. We work with small businesses, advertising, and they're cutting back. We have an unprecedented rate of attrition right now because of the uncertainty, countered by an unprecedented spike in new clients, people trying to double down, small business owners. But our employees my employees, about 20 of them, they're scared. They don't know what's going on, and they don't know where what they're going to be able to afford next month.
I just want to remind, we have a current survey out there. It's very brief, maybe 5 questions, and it is around tariffs. And we're going to resend it again because not only is our Fed concerned and wants information, but we also work very close with the National Retail Federation. They are in direct lines with DC and your elected officials, and we need to hear stories or thoughts around that, particularly around sustainability. That is going to speak volumes. And if you receive that, if you can please take it. I promise it's only going to take a few minutes unless you want to tell us a story, which we're always open to stories. Or just what your thoughts are. So I just want to remind you of that. And also, is the email to get on the Fed survey, is that on your, besides the QR code?
They email me.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Or there.
And thank you for those who did that on our survey, state and local. Diana put that at the bottom, and that's always helpful.
Well, I want to echo Nancy and just say thank you to all of you. I'm going to try and wrap us up now, but unless there are any other comments that anyone liked. All right. Well, we appreciate your vulnerability. We appreciate you speaking up. We appreciate you all being here today and engaging in this conversation. We are here to listen to you all and help be a voice for local business and the concerns that you all have right now. So please feel free to continue that conversation with us specifically and with you all. We're really here to hold that space for you all to connect with one another. We would love to have your feedback on today's event and let us know what went well, what we could be doing better next year. We really appreciate your thoughts. We really appreciate your time. Thank you to Dominion Payroll, to Renee, to our team. We have a lot of great events coming up. One on May 9th with on business spaces and how you can maybe learn about saving money or navigating that itself. And that's with the community Climate Collaborative as well. And we'll be back here on the 20th. We have a session on May 22nd with Andy Farrell on cash flow. So I encourage you to go to the InUnison website. The full report will be there, and you can check out some of those great events. But thank you all so much for your time. And again, please take a second to do the feedback for us so that we can continue to bring you these great events. Thank you.